Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So today we are going to be talking about Kindred and his initial reception, my personal expectations of the champion, so on and so forth. But before we can get to that point, we're going to be addressing the whole Kindred pronoun thing, because I have seen content creators already start, adjusting and using the they them pronouns, and Kabam doesn't make this easy at all, because according to the bio, obviously they refer to as Kindred as two different people. One is a guy, one is a lady, and we do not know exactly which one we are going to be getting here, or which one this is meant to be. So until Kabam clarifies whether it's Stacy Osborne or Gabriel, I'm just going to use he him pronouns. And that is also not to try and be, malicious or offensive towards anyone specifically, but I'll also be completely transparent here. As much as possible, I will avoid using they them pronouns referring to a single person. I'm not saying I would never do that. If like my childhood friend would, have a chat with me and tell me that he wants some different pronouns, I would do it, but I'd do it out of respect for that person, not thinking that it's the right thing. I would just try to be polite, because every fiber of my brain just learning English wasn't easy to begin with, to a degree where I can converse fluently, and all of these new language rules and everything else, I just don't. And I believe the things that I believe. There is no hatred towards anyone. If you believe what you want to believe, that is perfectly fine. We are obviously, allowed to disagree, and by disagreeing with your stance on all of the gender things and pronouns, I am not trying to invalidate your existence. I think you exist. You're perfectly fine. I think on this subject, you may or may not be wrong. I may or may not be wrong, but I certainly do not do any of this thing out of malice. It's mainly the reason in my head and logic and I don't know, basic facts of life that dictate to me in head that I just don't want to go down that entire route. So Kabam are completely free to come out and tell us which version of Kindred we have in front of us, whether it's Gabriel, whether it's Stacy. I will use according pronouns, he, him, she, her. But until they do, I'll take a creative liberty and refer to Kindred as a champion, as he, him. Again, if somebody does find it, alarming or offensive, then I'm sorry. You believe different things than I do, and that's okay. I'm not trying to be aggressive towards anyone. That said, we do need to talk about the reception of Kindred, because he has spurred already several threads on the forums. And videos that we have seen of Kindred effectively highlight him as like the king of all noodles, like the noodle of all noodles. His damage output is just abysmal. It really is. When you can effectively, draw similarities from Kindred to Mojo, in the sense that they shorten the buff duration, they both have access to damage and stuff like that, but realize that Mojo is a ramp-up champion who performs at his best once you have already ramped him up in previous 4 or so fights. And Mojo still manages to outrun Kindred easily from 0 ramp-up, and, by a significant margin in any generic matchup, let alone any damaging matchup. That just tells you that the champion on its base is not viable offensively. And we have people that come out here and say that then again, he's a fabulous utility machine, he's great, high buff matchups, especially with MD and so on and so forth. Reality is he isn't. And let me explain something when it comes to the champion, especially their offensive use particularly. You can have all of the immunities, every single immunity in the game. You can have a ton of abilities, but if you're going to have the worst damage in the game, that champion's going to be worse. And obviously, we're taking things to the extreme here. Nobody's going to have all the immunities and stuff like that. But yeah, offensively speaking, if you do not have damage, you're basically useless. Even if you are useful, you're kind of the last champion anybody will want to use because people have stuff to do. And if you can finish a quest in 20 minutes with any other random champion, or 1 hour with Kindred, you're probably going to take those 20 minutes, even if you need to use less than ideal counter. And just to prove a point, the same is accurate vice versa. Kabam could release, or not even release, just let's say Kabam could amend any of the 2015 champions, like, I don't know, let's go with Captain America, right? Improve his block proficiency so that he takes no damage on block at all, ever. And he has basically no abilities, right? But if they increased his attack value by times 20, let's say, and gave him the best damage in the game, he would be the best champion in the game. Or definitely one of the most used champions. For sure, because if you finish all fights, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times faster than anything else, he would be immediately on top of Battlegrounds, he'd be immediately on top of Alliance War, he'd be immediately on top of casual questing and virtually every other area of the game, if Captain America's damage output would be, by far and above the best in the game. And he doesn't need any abilities. He doesn't need immunities. He doesn't need power control, buff control, regeneration, any of that stuff. If you have the top damage in the game, you would be the top champion in the game. And if you can access that damage, super easily and stuff. That's just the way it is. And all of the abilities in the world do not help a champion offensively if your damage is not good enough. And that's the case here with Kindred. So that's as far as the offensive conversation goes. However, obviously, since the release of Battlegrounds, obviously we have had like Alliance War for a while, but since the release of Battlegrounds, champion defensive value matters now. It matters a lot. So we can follow the scenario. What happens to the value of Kindred, let's say, if he remains unchanged? Well, that again entirely depends how well he's going to do on defense in Alliance Wars and Battlegrounds. Because if he, does turn out to be a crazy good defender, he's still going to be extremely desired champion. Just because he's noodle does not mean that he has lost his value. The problem there is that those are like 2 very specific game modes where it does matter. So if you're personally not interested in Battlegrounds, then, the champion will effectively be kind of worthless to you. And therefore, I do think it is a very bad design philosophy to make a champion and have him be like 90% defensive oriented. I think it's kind of just a unnecessarily frustrating situation with the champion. I think it's perfectly fine if a champion doesn't have a defensive value and everything is offensive, because you do use champions in every game mode for offense. In every single game mode that exists, that's kind of the point. You take a champion and you use and you play with them, and you can gain value from that. If a champion is designed to be 90% defender, then you effectively only function in 2 game modes, and the rest of the game you have no value for. Therefore, I just think it's kind of like shooting yourself in the foot and investing all this time and effort designing a great champion, and then automatically, dropping about 80% of the player base for that champion that doesn't care about Battlegrounds, so you're immediately kind of like limiting the amount of players that will care about Kindred by default, because not every player does care, highly about Battlegrounds. And on top of it, again, it just seems like a very, very big waste, especially because there's no reason for it, considering that we have tons of champions that can be very challenging defenders and are decent on attack, and vice versa. We have very decent attackers and are somewhat decent on defense. I don't think it ever has to be like an either-or type of situation, and if it is, then it should be, leaning towards offensive use, because then everybody can actually play and enjoy that champion. And the best comparison here is kind of Korg, in a sense, from what we have had, where Korg is one of the best defenders in the game, and Korg has little to no offensive value unless you synergize him. And eventually, I'm sure Kabam can give Kindred some synergies. But fact of the matter is, for about 7 years of this game's runtime, everybody despised and hated Korg. Opinion of Korg has changed because of Battlegrounds for those people who play Battlegrounds, because he has value in helping you win the matches. But in its essence, I just hope that Kabam does not carry on the same design philosophy as with Korg. Because, yeah, effectively, if I think it's just a champion that's not designed in a good faith in an instance like this. Because if a champion's only job in the game is to KO them in quests and make them use revives, to KO them in alliance wars, to KO your opposing fighters in battlegrounds, this is a champion that by definition is designed to frustrate people and to make their time worse and to hinder and to piss them off and to annoy them and for players to use items on the said champion. And there's nothing wrong with having capable defensive abilities. I do think we need good defenders in the game, of course. I do think there's a lot wrong with designing a champion whose sole and only purpose is to effectively piss people off in the game and make them annoyed and suffer and to get frustrated. And all of these things put aside, the fact that you automatically close down champion for like 80% of the community, because if you don't care about the battlegrounds or whatever, most people are going to think he's a dud. Then the fact that, again, you're very limited where you can actually benefit from this champion in terms of game modes and so forth. And most importantly, yeah, I just really dislike the entire thought process and the idea behind a champion like this, where he will serve no other purpose other than to get people KO'd, other than to annoy people, other than to make them spend items. So I hope this video, perhaps reach somebody at Kabam and they, can consider this point of view about it, because we all want to play the game and we want to enjoy it. And when new champions come out, we look forward to it because we want to have fun using those champions as well, not just throwing them on defense and hoping that the opponent doesn't know how to fight them or doesn't get a counter. And, this certainly, we can't say that this has been a trend in Kabam, but when you are confronted with a champion where quite obviously the entire value of this champion is placed on defense, it just, again, brings all of these questions up line. So I do hope that Kabam does end up increasing his damage numbers relatively significantly whilst maintaining his defensive viability, because that's obviously another factor that we need to think about. If they're going to give Kindred a ton more extra damage, then they need to be very clever about it, because by doing so, they can make him, significantly harder and even more of a defensive, nightmare powerhouse. So ultimately, as far as it goes for Kindred, his value currently entirely depends on how well he is going to slow down, annoy, and get people KO'd in battlegrounds. I personally think, he will still have value for the high-end gamers. If I would be like mid-tier or lower-tier player, it is absolutely a champion I would not bother with too much, no matter how good he looks. And yeah, I hope Kabam doesn't make many champions like this, and even with this champion, I do hope that Kabam does address the lack of damage. And I'm kind of surprised in the first place that they released a champion in 2023 that has like little to no offensive use. And not because of his kit. Somebody worked very, very hard designing that kit and being thoughtful. Because they did give him offensive abilities that would help you play the champion. It's just that nobody will use any of his offensive abilities because there's no damage. So again, the big question is like, why? Why do you do it? Why do you put, like, you could take away half of his ability. Anything that Kindred does on attack, you could effectively take away, keep all of his defensive abilities, and he would still be exactly as valuable champion in this game as he is right now. Or like maybe lose 1% of his pursuit value. And I think that's just bad design philosophy. Like, why do you do it for? Why do you spend? Why do the designers spend all this time coming up with this intricate, interesting, cool kit that's just gonna sit completely unused, unloved, and covered in cobwebs. Because if Kabam does not improve Kindred's damage output to a significant degree, then a year from now, nobody's gonna even know what he does offensively. Nobody's gonna use him for it. And again, the question is like, why do you do that? What was the point? So that's what I think about Kindred. Let me know, and I'm gonna catch you guys soon. Hello there, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about